The first thing we want to do today is to go over page 22. The assignment you have on page 22, that's the only page we're going to check today, is page 22. Should not take very long, all true and false. So let's go through them. Everybody ready?
Yes.
Number 1 is true, 2 false, 3 false, 4 true, 5 true, 6 false, 7 false, 8 true, 9 false, 10 false, 11 true, 12 true, 13 false, 14 false, 15 is debatable depending on how you understand the question. How many of you put true? How many of you put false? You put both true and false? Or are you just slow getting your hand down?
No, I was raising my hand. Yeah, I was slow getting.
Alright, so no one put false? Okay, good. Then you understood it the way it was intended. That's true. The only way it could be false is if you understood fighting well as being the same as fighting bravely. But the answer is true. 16, false. 17, true. 18, false. 19, false. 20, false. Any that you need repeated? Stephen?
13 or 14?
13, false. 14, false.
Okay.
Lahana?
19.
19, false.
5 and 6.
5, true. 6, false. Steph?
17, 18.
17, true. 18, false. 11, true.
2.
You got behind right from the start. False. All right. Put the number incorrect at the top by your name, and I'll collect those and record them later. Someone get our people in the hall, please. Just pass them up to the front. Make sure your name is on it and the number that you missed. Now, Alex?
So I have a page 15 question. I was making sure that you start answering them today. Should I keep it or keep it?
So you
Yes,
say that again?
I had the assignment that I missed
I know.
questions. I put them on the page 18
Yeah, that's right.
7.
questions.
So, okay, how does tell me how that's relevant.
I thought we were going to go over them tomorrow. So should I keep them?
Go over what tomorrow?
The page 18 questions.
We already did page 18.
No, there's the questions on them.
Yeah.
Questions. We had the homework last night,
Yeah.
1 through 3.
Oh, we're not. Oh no, we're not checking that.
Oh,
We're only checking this one page.
Do you want the other
No.
ones? Okay.
All right, now we're going to have some changes. I want to tell you about it as soon as somebody gets the people in the hall. I'll get it.
Oh, we're supposed to pass the next one. Yeah, no.
Wait, what are we passing?
The protocol.
Are you changing forms to we're not actually passing? The only thing with that, do you see so many names there?
All right, listen. We're not back yet. Where did they go? Is there a wardrobe out there into Narnia?
That'd be good. Sleep on?
Is the recording? Oh.
They were like fighting here. It said they went down to true and false, and I said, I don't know, they just told me something. So, they're like, well, we're not done.
I didn't send you out there necessarily to get done. I sent you out there so you wouldn't hear the answers. You get done more quickly. All right?
You
Now,
said you were still working on it.
no, we're not.
No, I didn't. I said we're done. I said come in. You were like, we're still working.
All right. What is on the board on RunWeb, I'm going to adjust. So what's up there right now for tomorrow? Oh, I don't have anything. So no problem. Here we go. Here's for tomorrow, and I'll get this written up there later today if you want to come back. For tomorrow, I want you to read in your Millikan pages, page 24. and then read what we have to call Milliken 2, because it's like part 2. There were 2 booklets that I got these exercises from, both produced by Milliken, part 1, part 2. So now Milliken 2 will refer to pages that begin with page 1 again. Does that make sense? So I'll read Milliken page 24, which is toward the end of the first part of Milliken. And then Milliken part 2, read page 1. And then complete the map exercises number 1 on page 2. So you're reading Milliken page 24, and then you're going to part 2 of Milliken, reading page 1, and completing the map exercises number 1 on page 2. It sounds like a lot, but it's really not. All right, today let's continue looking at Gettysburg. We saw how they got to Gettysburg. Now let's see what happened once the Confederate Army and the Union Army figure out that each other is there. By the way, while you're turning there, let me recommend a movie to you if you want to understand the Battle of Gettysburg better. There's a whole movie made about it called Gettysburg. Yeah. And it's based on a book called Killer Angels, which is an excellent book. I think in reading that book, I understood the Battle of Gettysburg better than I ever did before. And the movie does a really good job of portraying what happened as well. So we're going to look through each day here. First of all, and it's kind of an overview of what occurred, and then we're going to look more in detail with a computer-generated program for maybe tomorrow. All right, here is a picture of Generals Lee and Longstreet planning what they're going to do. Now remember, Lee wasn't planning on fighting at Gettysburg, neither was Meade, the Union commander. It just so happened that's where some Confederate soldiers who were scouting out Gettysburg happened to run into some Union soldiers that were scouting out the area, trying to find out where the Confederate Army was. And they began fighting there in Gettysburg, and pretty soon both armies are coming in. Now, what was it that Lee was looking for in Gettysburg? Do you remember? Shoes, right. Remember, his army was very poorly shod, if we can use that word. All right, so they're looking for shoes. Day 1 of the battle then comes after this initial skirmish between 2 parts of the army. This is a photograph of Gettysburg. It shows some of the battlefield. How many of you have ever been to Gettysburg, the battlefield? Okay, a lot of you. Very good. How many of you had a guide? How many of you had a guide take you around? That's really the best way to do it, as I found. Although I do have a CD tour that is helpful, but it doesn't. We found that for, I think it was my wife and I think my son was with us, for 3 of us even. It was cheaper to hire a personal guide to get into our car and take us around than it was to take the tour bus or whatever they have there. And it was much better because you could ask a lot of questions and all that. So anyway, so that's a good way of doing it. Some of you may have recognized this area, probably not because it's an older picture. But day 1 begins with the Confederates driving the Federals back through the city of Gettysburg. And we'll see that portrayed a little more clearly in the computer program. So initially the Confederates were driving the Federal Army back through the streets of Gettysburg. So they got them on the run. And at that point, the Union Army is backed up through Gettysburg, but finds itself on higher ground, which when you're fighting a battle back in those days, was a good place to be. And so they find this high ground outside the town of Gettysburg, just south of the city. That twilight time, it's a time of celebration for the Confederate Army as they have driven the Union back through the town. Jeb Stuart is the cavalryman who has the job of scouting out the opposition. Being he's on horseback, he's able to move quickly, and he is the person who is used by the general to give him information on where the opposing army is. Unfortunately, Jeb Stuart's not there. Stuart had decided to move away from the main body of the Confederate Army to try to help out the Army by finding some supplies. And so he found supply wagons, Union supply wagons, and attacked them and was busy doing all that because nobody knew that there was going to be a battle take place. But it happened. And Lee was kind of fighting blind in that he didn't know exactly where the Union troops were because he didn't have Stuart there to tell him. And Longstreet was very upset about this, that Stuart wasn't there. Stuart was off gaining glory, he thought, by going around capturing Union supply wagons instead of being where he needed to be. Longstreet had a perspective that the Confederate Army should not fight an offensive war, have a battle plan that was one of attack. He felt they always did better when they were on the defensive. And that's how they had functioned through much of the war. But Lee determined that there needed to be a Confederate victory, and that meant attacking the Union forces. So much against the advice of Longstreet, Lee proposed a battle plan that would be initiated on day 2, July 2nd. It's easy to remember the days of the battle because it's the same dates in July. First day is July 1st. The next day is July 2nd. So on July 2nd, Lee renewed the assault on Meade's position, hitting both flanks. Now, we'll see it better when we're looking at the computer-generated battle, but there is a line of defense along a hillside like this, and Lee is attacking from this flank and this flank. Now, what's the advantage of attacking the flank of a military position of the enemy? What's the advantage of gaining the flank? Do everyone know what I mean by the flank? I should ask that first. Do you know what I mean by the flank? It's the ends. You got your battle line, your soldiers kind of lined up in an area, and your ends. What's the advantage of attacking the ends?
They wouldn't really be able to retreat.
Right, they can't retreat because they're going back into their own line unless they kind of swing around. But, so what else? What else is an advantage of attacking the flanks?
Kind of like holding in the whole army, like little blocks.
Yeah, so you kind of box them in, they can't go either direction that way, at least. If this row here was a flank, and we'll give it that it may not be exactly straight, all right, and I'm an opposing army coming this way, and I can get part of my army over to your side, what advantage do I have over here as far as firing at my enemy, as opposed to coming this way? Louder?
You're talking from behind almost?
Almost, but what? I'm actually from the side. What advantage do I have by coming on the side, Alex?
Well, like Lydia and them can shoot at you.
Yeah, they can't shoot at me, but I'm shooting right down their line, and especially if I have any artillery, I can take out a lot of soldiers who can't really come back at me. Does that make sense? And if I can not only attack the flank, but if I can keep them from stopping me in my movement and can keep moving around, then where am I? Then where am I then? I'm behind them. And what advantage is that?
Catch them by surprise.
Louder?
Catch them by surprise. They won't.
Well, it may not be much of a surprise by the time I get there, unless it's done really quickly, but, and so that could be, but what else? What advantages are to getting behind the enemy? Brady?
They can't retreat.
They can't retreat. I've got them on both sides. I've got an army in front of them and now an army behind them. I've got them hemmed in, right? And which way is the army that I'm attacking focusing? They're focusing that way. It's hard to turn your focus another direction. So you see, if you can gain the flank, that's why it's so important in battles where they took place on foot, by soldiers on foot, to try to flank the enemy. You find this back in history as far as you can go whenever there's battles. To flank the enemy is to gain an advantage. And so that's what Lee proposes to do. He's attacking from both flanks. The most important part of that flanking maneuver was led by Longstreet. So let's again pretend that you're the Union Army. The Confederate Army is back here, further back, behind a wall somewhere. And there's a road that runs along here, somewhat out of sight of the Union Army. A lot of trees and stuff in between. And the Confederate Army is largely over this area. Lee sends Longstreet down this road to attack that flank. And so Longstreet, against his wishes, he didn't think it was a good idea. And he takes his troops down this road, and there's woods out here. Now, these guys on the flank are up on top of a hill, but there's woods in between. So Longstreet thinks he can kind of sneak his men up through the woods and then attack this position, take them by surprise, and overrun that position. Now, not only is it an advantage to be on the flank, but if you can conquer their flank, and now you're up on the hill, the same hill that the rest of the Union Army's on, now you've got a real advantage because you're on the same level and you're shooting at them right down the line. You see? So that's the idea. So Longstreet takes his men down there. Now, in the meantime, I don't know if you remember one of the generals that we looked at before. Let's see if I go back to it. Was Daniel Sickles. Now, he was born in New York City, studied law, went to Congress, so he was a politician. Now, sometimes in the military, you get your position because you have started out as a soldier and you worked your way up. But sometimes you get your position because you know people. And, it's really an honor, it's really a prestigious thing to be named a general. And so that's how he got there. So Sickles got there because he was a politician, he knew people, and so he got appointed to a position in the Union Army. Now what happens is that Sickles wasn't content with being up here on the ridge. He decided he would get into the battle a lot more easily if he came down off the ridge down into this peach orchard down here. So he's out of position. And there's a big gap here. The artillery's not there. Well, Longstreet, meanwhile, is coming up. So if Sickles is not in position, and Longstreet comes up here, and he's able to attack this position, they don't have any reinforcements right here. So it looks like it might be easier for Longstreet to take that. But there was a guy by the name of Warren who was over on the other end of the other area of the line, and he decided to check up on what was going over here. He was an artilleryman, and he came down here and found Sickles was gone. He was down out where he's not supposed to be, and he thought, basically, what would I do if I was Lee? And he thought, I wonder, with all this thick woods down there, so I wonder if they might be coming up through those woods. Just had a hunch. So he ordered one of the artillerymen to turn his cannon and to face it, and he said, I want you to fire over the woods. Go not into them, but fire over them. So he did. Boom. The artillery shell went over the woods. Now, if you're a soldier down here in the woods carrying your rifle with a bayonet and a shell goes over your head, what do you naturally do? You hear a shell going over your head. What will you do? What? It's over your head. You know it's not going to hit you. It's already gone by.
Probably look and watch.
You can turn around and look at it, right? See where it's going. Wouldn't you normally do that? If something flies over your head, don't you usually turn around and look at it? If somebody throws a baseball and it goes over your head, don't you normally turn around and see where it's going? That's what they did. When they did, their bayonets caught some sunlight and reflected, and so Warren he saw all this reflection down there, so he knew that there was part of the Confederate Army down there. Pretty tricky, huh? So he got signals back up here. He's got these guys prepared. This area of the Union forces were commanded by Joshua Chamberlain, who had been a literature professor in New England. He had asked for permission to take a leave of absence from being a professor to join the Army, and he was denied. And so he said, well, how about if I take a sabbatical, which means, if you're a professor or pastor, sometimes you just take time off to go study. How about if I take a sabbatical, go to Europe and, read stuff, research stuff. And they said, okay, you can do that. Well, instead he snuck off and joined the Army and became an officer in the Army. So he's leading this position over here. So as Longstreet then comes up through the woods, the Union is somewhat ready for them. And through Joshua Chamberlain's efforts, we're able to beat them back. This is a picture by John Paul Strain and General Winfield Scott Hancock. He's a Union commander at Gettysburg in that area. Here's a painting done of Confederates from Mississippi at Gettysburg, attacking on one of the ends. And here's specifically where we're just talking about. It's called Little Round Top. If you've been to Gettysburg, you may remember that. It's over on the end of the Union line. And so you can see here they're attacked. They're coming up through the woods. So Chamberlain's men, the Union is up here in the woods, and they're fighting hand to hand there. Several attacks were made. Here's another painting of Joshua Chamberlain, Colonel he is at the Battle of Gettysburg. And what happened is that the Union soldiers there ran out of ammunition. All right, so now the Confederates are going to attack again, and they have no ammunition. So Chamberlain pulls something that you would say, that's a really stupid idea, but it worked. And that is, he told his men just to run down the hill, screaming as loud as you can with your bayonets. And so they did. They started running through the woods, screaming, holding their bayonets out, and the Confederate soldiers were just so freaked out by this that they started running. And they ran away. And so Chamberlain was able to hold the position. And so he became the hero of Little Round Top. There he is urging his men forward on the right. Bayonets. See some other pictures here. All right, so at the end of the day, on July 2nd, Lee has attacked both flanks. The flank that Longstreet was attacking was unsuccessful, except that it drew soldiers from the middle over to that end. The attack on the other flank was somewhat more successful. It caused the Union to kind of curve around a little bit, but also drew men from the center. Now, Lee, knowing that at the end of the day, July 2nd, that he had caused a movement within the Union line, had a plan for the next day. Well, that night, Jeb Stuart finally arrives. And Lee was so angry with him for not being there, because he needed him, to tell him where the Union troops were. And Longstreet was mad enough that he thought he should have been court-martialed for not being there. But Lee stayed mad for a while, but then he eventually forgave Stuart. You know, he really liked the guy and knew that he was valuable for him, and so he forgave him and continued to use him after this battle. Longstreet, I'm not so sure he ever quite forgave Stuart for not being there when he was so needed. That night, he and Lee and Longstreet meet together to discuss the next day. Now, if you are the Confederate commander, if you're Lee, and you know that the previous day you have attacked from this side and you attacked from this side, and that caused soldiers in the middle to go to the sides to help defend the ends, the flanks, what's your next move? What? Go forward. What do you mean? Forward where? To the middle, because that's not as enforced as it was. If you go up the middle. Now, if you go up the middle and you break through the middle, then can you see what advantage you would have then? Now you can go behind, and you've got them surrounded. You can flank both ends of the sides that you've broken in two. So it's a way to victory, is to attack the middle, which now appears to be weaker. Does that make sense? So that's what Lee decides to do on day 3. And the person he picks to lead this charge, yes?
They attacked the middle. They were trying to get a flank on them, so they would surround them in one area. So that would just say that the Confederates would be in the middle of the army when the Union would have them flanked.
No, but well, okay, yeah, but if they're on the offensive and they're taking the middle,
Yeah.
now once they get there, the Confederates, because they still have soldiers at both ends. Now
Okay.
you basically caused the one Union line to break into two, and you've got soldiers on both ends of each side, so you've got them both flanked.
Okay.
Now you could say, yeah, well then they've got the Confederates flanked too, but if they've got the momentum,
Okay.
to get in a position where they're continuing to fire and the Union soldiers are in disarray, then that can be a great victory. It's a way to get a victory. Your point's a good one, but a lot of it is momentum, just like in basketball or any sport. Sometimes momentum will carry you, right? Sometimes you'll gain just by being on the offensive. All right, so the person that Lee chooses to lead this charge is Major General George Pickett. Now, here's an outline of the hillside. Devil's Den is in a lower area down here. Actually, there were Confederate sharpshooters down here shooting up at Round Top and Little Round Top. They saw officers up there, and they were trying to pick them off. And the defense goes along. It's hard to see where the hill is. The hill goes along this way and this way. So here's the hill, then it's in the middle. And Cemetery Ridge goes up to Cemetery Hill. The Confederate soldiers are down here, and they're going to attack across this field up the hill to Cemetery Hill. Here's another picture of it as they're, it was much further apart than this, showing attacking the hill. All right, now, what happens is this. Lee is going to assault the center of the Union position. What he does is standard military procedure, and that is Lee had his artillery, which is located, back here, back in the woods. You can't even see the cannon, but he has them firing up at the ridge where the Union artillery is, hoping to take out the artillery, because you don't want to send your men across an open field if they've got their cannon that can just fire down at your men, right? So you want to take out those cannons. So they bombarded that area with cannon shot, hoping to take out the Union artillery. And they thought they did. Because at one point, the Union cannons stopped firing. So Lee thought, that means they can't fire anymore, and ordered Pickett to charge. What Lee didn't know is that they had miscalculated when firing their own cannon and had fired over the heads of the Union artillery and did not hit them. The Union stopped firing. I'm not sure what the reason was. They stopped firing. There was so much smoke between both sides firing that you couldn't see anything. But when the Union stopped firing, Lee took that as a sign. Now it's the time to attack. So he sent Pickett and his men across this field. Well, as they came across the field, the Union artillery opened up on them and killed many of them. Wave after wave of Confederate soldiers went across this field, attempting to gain that high ground right in the middle of the Union Army. Here is a picture, a painting of them forming the line to attack. This is the Confederate Army moving toward what's called the angle. There was a particular place in the line that they weren't able to penetrate. And they were able to fight their way through, even though the artillery was taking out a lot of them. And by the way, you know, I don't know how much you know about cannon fire, cannonballs, but there were different kinds of canisters that were used to fire from cannon. You know, there's the one you always think of, those round balls, right? And when they would hit, what happens when a cannonball hits? If they're firing and it hits the ground, what happens to the cannonball? What?
It sinks into the ground.
It doesn't.
No.
Now, if it's muddy, it might, but what does it do? It bounces along. And so, even if you aren't hit by a cannon shot when it first hits, it bounces along. It may take out 4 or 5 guys' legs along the way back behind, because it keeps bouncing, and when it hits, it just takes off whatever is there. So you got that. Then you got another cannon shot that's like a shotgun. They put a whole bunch of small iron balls together, and so when it fires out, have you ever fired a shotgun? You know what a shotgun's like. It has instead of one projectile, there's a bunch of small ones, BBs. Well, these are like big BBs, and so you know you're going along, and cannon shot like that comes at you. You've got a whole bunch of small BBs coming, not BBs, I mean cannon shot coming through, and they're taking out all kinds of guys. Then you have the kind that have a fuse on it that's intended to explode above the army. And so those cannon, those balls are being shot out, and as they get over your head, the fuse burns down, and it explodes and shoots out shrapnel all over the place. So when you're facing artillery like that across an open field, it's pretty tough to think that you're even going to make it. Not to mention all the soldiers up there that are firing at you. So Pickett and his men faced a very daunting task, an impossible task. We'll find out what happens next tomorrow.